Humanianity, a new religious call. Humanianity, religion for us all. Humanity, now we all can see. Humanity, how much better we can be. Hi, I'm Bill Van Fleet, and this is Humanianity Conversation number 34, recorded on January 9th, 2020. It is the 13th recorded conversation with my friend Steve Rast. We talked about some of the problems involved in many of the religions, from our somewhat different worldviews, he having a lot of experience within several religions and being somewhat more theistic, especially about the issue of sin and guilt, and about some of the coercive tendencies within some of the religions regarding requirement of loyalty to defining belief systems. We also talked about some of the beneficial aspects of many of the religions, and how those beneficial aspects are often referred to with the word love, and what that word really represents. Well, it's been quite a while. I'm wondering if you have a particular topic that you were interested in related to Humanianity, which is related to almost everything. So, was there something specifically that you were thinking about addressing?
No, not really. It was kind of interesting what we were talking about Tuesday night, I guess.
Yeah.
This whole thing of authority versus authoritarianism.
Yes. And okay, that sounds good. Let's. Is it clear in your mind? See, I have a clarity in my mind, but that may not be what somebody else would have in their minds. So, do you? How do you see the difference between authoritarian and authority? Of course, authoritarian is an adjective and authority is a noun, but
noun. And that's a good way to look at it. The authoritarian personality believes they have all the right answers, and through their power or whatever, they tend to impose those on other people.
Okay, now that you mentioned two things, and I think the second thing is what I associate with authoritarian, not the first. The first would be a mistake, that the person believes that he knows everything. That's just a mistake. But authoritarian would have to do with the manner of leadership or the manner of determination, the foundation, say, or something.
Yeah, but I think first, an authoritarian person, I mean, they do, I guess, believe what they're trying to impose.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And, but they have to have their way, I guess you would say. Yeah, it has to be their way or the highway, usually. The authority, as you said, is a noun. And a person is, let's say, an authority on some particular knowledge base or whatever. And the folks that they are leading look to them as an authority.
Yes.
Trust in them as an authority. And so therefore they tend to follow, but it's not that and I use the term servant leadership. It's not that the servant leader imposes his or her views about things. It is just that he or she is recognized by those who are following as having the right view on those things.
Yeah. That's the way I see it too. An authority is somebody who, well, if a person is considered an authority, that means that people believe that that person knows a whole lot about the subject area, is very competent in the area.
Yes.
But authoritarian leadership is not. It is leadership on the basis of inflicting suffering or granting reward to people as a way of getting them to do what that individual wants. I'm thinking at the moment here that maybe a person could be an authority, but also be quite authoritarian. So what the opposite of authoritarian would be that it would be the social contract kind of group arrangement where the group decides we will look to this individual for certain decision making because that person knows the most, or for whatever reason, even if they flip a coin as to who's going to be leader, that would not be authoritarian leadership. That would be leadership by virtue of being placed there by the group according to some procedure. Something like that, I think. Yeah. So, was that the thing that interested you the most about Tuesday?
Somewhat. That was toward the end because we were speaking of particularly, in religion, having a supreme being, a God or whatever, and is that God authoritarian? I guess is kind of where we were talking around. I guess. So do we? Kind of that grand says who again? Well, it's the grand says who. The grand says who because the grand says who is imposing a particular ethic or morality, or is the grand says who more of a authority because the grand says who is suggesting that we choose the way at least we perceive through primarily through today kind of written holy words. I guess it probably was more oral in times past, but so do we accept what these words are conveying, or as imposed on us, or do we suggest them as, take them as, good suggestions for living? I think it was the Reverend Jerry Falwell one time who said, we don't call them the 10 suggestions, we call them the 10 commandments. Well, the 10 commandments would be much more authoritarian. Mm-hmm. The 10 suggestions, and when I say suggestions, maybe it is as it is, and I forget the chapter and verse, but it is in Deuteronomy where Moses is getting ready to go into the promised land, And he is conveying what he believes is God's word to the people. And he's saying, today I set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life. It's sort of like I'm setting before you today a choice, life or death. But I'm suggesting that you choose life. So,
well, I think that we are now actually mixing two topics. We had just talked about authoritarian versus authority. That was a topic, and that seemed to kind of come to an end. And then we went to, I believe, a very interesting other component, and that is the foundation for ethical beliefs as to what we should or should not do. And there's the there are different beliefs about whether there is such a foundation. And I believe that the foundation is, quote, arbitrary. And that runs against what almost everybody believes. That may include you, I'm not sure. But the alternatives are, no, the way you tell what you should or should not do is whether it is what X wants you to, X being whoever or whatever is most powerful. That's one thing. So that would be that ethics is based upon whatever God wants, for instance, or at a lower level, whatever mother or father wants, or whatever the leader wants or the culture. But that is what determines what is good and what is bad ethically. And then there are the people that are atheistic and say, no, there is good and bad. It is not arbitrary. There is actually good and bad to be found in the universe. And I think that that's hard to demonstrate. I don't think it is correct. So I think
neither do I, in that respect. No.
Yeah.
Well, I think old Arthur left there in that Duke University Law Review Journal article, I think did a good job of settling the question in that you, and he says this is the problem with ethics. He also says, as a law professor, he says this is the problem with law. You can't have a right or wrong without predicating it on some kind of foundation. The problem is, and certainly in our culture, there is no obvious foundation. And I myself believe that you cannot rationally come up with foundational statements. We live by foundational statements, but in the end, those are really statements of faith. We trust that the way it is. We don't know that this is the way it is in the sense of cognitive, understanding. And it just appears that's the way the way reality is constructed.
Okay, I see it differently than that.
I mean, the modern philosophers, Wittgenstein and some of these folk, I mean, they're pretty convincing in that there is no obvious foundation, certainly that everybody can agree on. And so in the end, you have your foundation, knowing that you can't prove your foundation to anyone. It just simply is, and then you live your life hopefully in congruence to those kind of foundational statements that constructs your worldview. But your worldview itself cannot be arrived at logically, I don't think. Once you arrive at a worldview, you can use logic to have an understanding as to whether some act that you do is in congruence with your worldview. I think what I see going on is everybody has a worldview, I guess.
Well, we've introduced a term, worldview, that is, I'm not sure exactly what that means. My suggestion is we rewind, go back a little bit to the foundation issue about. I agree with you that there is not a foundation that can be found and proven to be the foundation, the correct one. So the alternative to that, what you point out is that, well, then you can have an idea and I can have an idea, and they may be similar or they may be different. And so one possibility would be, well, you've got everybody in the world, and each person has their own ethics based upon their own foundation that they accept, but that there isn't any real right answer. I agree that there is no really right answer, but there is an alternative, and that is the issue of agreement. In other words, I can propose one to you, and you can propose one to me, and we can listen to others, and then we can choose, and just because we like it, use that as the foundation. And that's the idea behind Humanianity. Of course, Humanianity, for anybody who is viewing this that doesn't know about it, it's the third exponential change for our species, the first having been the development of language, the second having been the development of the rules of logic and rules of evidence, giving us science and technology, and the third is just taking off, and that's in our ethics. And our ethics has been authoritarian. We've just normally and naturally assumed that it has to be an act of obedience. But what is emerging is, well, no, look at how we are living all over this planet with all of this pain, suffering, disability, and early death. And so let us get together and choose an ultimate ethical principle, the foundation for our ethics, one that we can all agree upon if we choose, and the one proposed that is within the Humanianity concept is we should do that which will promote not only the survival of our species, but also as much joy, contentment, and appreciation as possible, and as little pain, suffering, disability, and early death as possible for everyone now and in the future. And that, I just made that up, but it's a suggestion that I think most people would say, yeah, that sounds good. And when we talk about anything having to do with should, in other words, an ethical belief, there is a part of the sentence that may actually be stated or not, but that's in order to. And so what our ethical beliefs would be based upon would be what we should and should not do in order to, and then promote the survival of our species and also the good life for everyone now and in the future. So that's not what people go by particularly, but increasingly they are saying, well, that's what we want to do. That's if we engage in democracy as opposed to dictatorship, we're probably going to have a better life with less pain, suffering, disability, and early death, and so on. So, so at any rate, that's why I would say that that's arbitrary. You would just choose that ultimate ethical principle because you liked it, because you don't like pain, suffering, disability, and early death, and you like joy, contentment, and appreciation, and you want it for everybody, not just yourself, as well as wanting our species to survive as long as possible. So, so that's the way that I see that. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, I think again, of course, when someone, has a particular ethical position and believes that it is a should, then one tends, like you say, to want other people to, have that view. So you tend to think your view is right, I guess. And that's where we run into trouble. That's where we run into that whole authoritarian thing, so you try to impose your ethical views on, on others.
Yeah, that's a particular place where I think we can easily tend to go wrong. I do not see a problem with us advocating to each other and trying to demonstrate to each other why our particular viewpoint is to be preferred or is more correct. I don't see anything wrong with advocacy. The authoritarian aspect has to do with, well, this is the way it's going to be, and you're going to suffer if you don't go along with me because I'm more powerful than you. That's the authoritarianism.
Mm-hmm.
So, so that's, I think these are important clarifications. But see, a lot of people will say, well, if you're advocating for something, then you're trying to force me to have your beliefs. And no, that's not correct. I'm trying to influence you because I think that would be a good thing for you and for me and for everybody. But the issue of force, like, well, yeah, I'm trying to convince you, but if I don't, then you'll just have to accept me killing you. That's authoritarian.
Mm-hmm.
But there is nothing wrong with advocacy. But people will react to advocacy. Like keep your beliefs to yourself if they are different from mine, or we just agree to disagree and go have a beer.
Yeah. And you see that a lot of times in what I term militant atheism. Yeah, where if you just not even trying to advocate, maybe just having a discussion, and God gets brought in, or something like God gets brought into the conversation, it just creates a real inflicting a situation of conflict, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what you're referring to is that when a difference of opinion is expressed, it may cause anger to appear in a person, and in order to avoid the anger, then we've done things like the postmodern idea that, well, what's true for you may not be true for me, so we just further discussion will be non-productive. And I think that postmodern movement is is in a negative direction. In other words, we need to have continuing discussion of those things that we don't agree upon, and work toward agreement by listening to each other and trying to understand each other. So that's...
Yeah, a good thing has kind of come out of postmodernism, though, especially in the way the postmodernists look at text and stuff. It's one of the terms used is the hermeneutics of I just had it in my mind and it came out. I know it. But it's basically, that every text is an interpreted text. Hermeneutics of suspicion. That's it. Hermeneutics of suspicion. So we approach a text, especially a text that might be very important, perhaps we think, for our own worldview or whatever, or agree with it or whatever. But you approach it, with suspicion. What is the intent behind the text? Why is the writer of the text, or sometimes writers and sometimes writers and editors, why are they, doing what they're doing? I've been reading an interesting book. Just was reading it this morning, in fact, and it's about the dispute, or what the author calls the conflict between the two mindsets of Erasmus and Luther. And Erasmus was very much a humanist. Luther was a very authoritarian kind of person for a variety of reasons. But one thing that was being written in the text this morning was Jerome. And St. Jerome put together the Latin Bible, the Vulgate. Well, there was actually a series of Latin interpretations, especially from the Greek in the New Testament, from the Greek to the Latin. But it was decided by the Pope at that time, maybe it was Pope Leo, but anyway, the Pope at that time, to get a more together, I guess, interpretation, and it chose Jerome. And one thing that Jerome did, as a lot of interpreters do, is as he's kind of interpreting the text, he does a little editorializing with the text. That would, and the problem there is that that Latin text, the English text, especially, before modern biblical scholarship, it basically was a translation of the Vulgate. So you've got a corrupted text somewhat with the Vulgate, and then you translate that into English, and then you just multiply your corruptions, and then people take those words to say, this is the truth, and this is the way we're supposed to be, or whatever. And I think postmodernism has helped us to, understand that, every text is an interpreted text. So in that sense, there is no literal text. We say, oh, look at those biblical literalists. Well, they're just interpreting too. They're just interpreting within a particular framework. And so, I think postmodernism, in some ways, I agree with you, though, that when we take it to say there is no truth, that can sometimes be a little problematic. Because if you have no truth in your own mind, then in a way, that is almost your worldview, and that's kind of a self-defeating worldview, because why is your way any better than anybody else's way? So like you're saying, I've got my truth, you've got your truth. So in that sense, maybe had some problems with, social cohesion and things. But
yeah, well, there are two components to what you're referring to with regard to postmodernism. Yeah, we are talking about one is the aspect that you were bringing up is indeed correct, that our words are very ambiguous and can be interpreted differently by different people. And so two people reading the same text will get two different things out of it to a certain extent. But that is true to the extent that the language is non-technical. Technical language is language where the words are much more precisely defined, even though it becomes impossible to define with absolute precision, but sufficient precision. If we weren't able to do that, it would be very hazardous to go to the moon and rely upon our beliefs about the correctness of our calculations and our predictions and so forth.
Yeah.
So that is one issue that is indeed correct. That when one person says something, another person may hear something different, meaning that as it goes into that person's mind, it gets parsed in a different way, and is and seems to mean something a little bit different than the person who sent it. Sometimes, frequently, unless it is technical. But the other thing that I was talking about is the idea that if you and I have a different opinion, then since there is no such thing as absolute truth, then there's no reason for us to work toward agreement. And the idea of the motivation for pursuing that line of thought is in order to be able to give up an activity that is causing anger, namely discussion, sharing and comparing of ideas that are different. So that's a separate thing, and that I think is going the wrong way. We need to, we should, ethical belief, have a strong commitment to trying to understand the other person and to work toward agreement, no matter how long it takes, within the constraints of time management. There are lots of things that we should do if we have the time to do them. So, but just to avoid discussion so that there won't be anger, I think goes down a wrong road.
I think, it's kind of interesting. I just had a situation come up here recently of Christian scripture and what it has to say about baptism. Well, 29 and a half, about 29 and a half years ago, after I'd been Catholic about a year, my parish asked me to become part of the leadership team in the Rites of Christian Initiation of Adults. And the principal rites of initiation are baptism, confirmation, and First Communion. Well, they sent myself and because they asked my wife too, they sent Martha and me, they sent us to a week-long retreat. And we vicariously experienced each one of those rites. Well, I was very taken with the adult baptism, and came back and discussed it and said, I think I probably ought to be baptized, because we were basically teaching that the principal initiation into the church is baptism, and the scriptures are quite clear that that's baptism by immersion. And in most churches, infant baptism is practiced, including the Catholic Church. But certainly my study and research, and I went back and looked at it, and infant baptism was not the standard up until Augustine. There were infants baptized, but they were principally baptized when they came into the church with their parents, if it was the parents and the child that were not Christian. And typically they did baptize the infant, but it wasn't routine. And so I asked them about it. They said, we don't do second baptisms, but some of the officials in the Diocese of Charleston with the RCI program said, well, yeah, we kind of got it wrong with the infants, because with the infants, we baptize at infant, and then we have First Communion at about 6 years old, and we have confirmation when the teenagers about 14 or 15, and so they did admit that, but we're still baptizing infants. Well, anyway, here I go and meet someone several months ago, and we began discussing that, and I certainly agreed with this person that, yeah, that's pretty much what, Scripture says, and pretty much what early church tradition did. And that then led to my having immersion baptism on December the 8th. And so, you have a text. Of course, that text is an interpreted text, and that text is based on copying of texts that go way back. But today, certainly, we have, at least in dealing with Christian scripture, we have a lot more scholarship on all of that. So our interpretations are probably much better from the Greek than St. Jerome's was. So yeah, you can have discussions about these things and not, create big arguments and all of that. I think the authority, when we're talking about authority and authoritarianism as far as ethics is concerned, is that the person who is an authority figure vis-a-vis ethics is one who people might see living a pretty good life, and they look at that and they say, yeah, that looks like a good way to do things and to live. So it's not that the authority figure in ethics necessarily imposes that ethic, but it's just that it is out there, and then people, choose that ethic because they, like you say, people would say choosing, the way of humanity. Well, we want less pain, suffering, disability, and early death, and more joy, contentment, and agreement. And so,
appreciation,
appreciation rather.
Mm-hmm.
And we, and it's not that, someone in humanity is imposing that on others, but it is just that it becomes a choice that, people are making because they see that as a way of living better, as you say.
Yeah. One clarification for viewers is that Humanianity is not a religion.
No.
It could become a religion theoretically in the far future, but what it is a movement in most of the religions, the movement away from authoritarianism toward the social contract as a way of determining what one should or should not do, and that it's within religion because it's something that is emerging within our species, and it is primarily occurring there, but it's occurring in general. It's just that our religions have so much to do with ethics as to what we should and should not do. And that gets into the issue of what is religion? Is it defined by its content, i.e., belief in a god or gods, or by its function, working together to be good people and so forth? And so there's disagreement about that. Most people think of religion according to its content, as if science were the belief in electrons and quarks and black holes, rather than science being a set of methods to derive accurate existential beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
But so now it's interesting that the baptism is a ritual, and you're talking about
the sacrament. It's one of the 7 sacraments.
Well, okay, what is a sacrament? What is that?
Well, it defines a sacrament as the outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace. So it is the outward and visible sign is the actual baptism itself, the water, the person being immersed, and all of that. The inward and spiritual grace, the church would say, Catholic Church would say, is the transformation of that person who is baptized by baptism, according to the church and according to early scripture. The person becomes a member of the Christian community, and
so that's and there's where some problem comes in, I think, primarily when we're talking about baptizing children. What we're talking about is the tendency for many of the religions to require for membership within the religion or acceptance within the religion, the commitment to believing certain things. And so if you're in a particular religion, if you believe those things, then you indicate that belief by going through, as you say, something objective that is that one can see. And I think there is a problem with doing that with children, as opposed to making it possible for children, increasingly as they grow, to become familiar with all the different religions, and so that they recognize that, well, there are big questions here, and they need to be worked on, and so forth, and that maybe and that to undergo a procedure, a baptism, that seems to imply, okay, you are now one of us because you believe as we do. That's part of our tribalism that causes so much difficulty. We are in all of these different tribes that have reduced empathy for each other and even fight and kill each other. So
it should be a person's choice. I agree with you, and the child can't make that choice. Of course, and what the church would say, well, the parents and the grandparents are really making the choice for the child and pledging to bring them up in a Christian environment and all that. But I would, if the Pope were listening to this, what I would suggest is that for the infants, perhaps there could be some kind of dedication. Understand the Baptists do this, of the child, welcoming the child, into the community, so to speak, but not, not doing something that only a person that has free choice can make. One thing that we do in the RCI process, at least in our parish, is that we try to make sure that it is a free choice. Now that's not perfect, of course, but they go through 2 years of instruction, and one thing we particularly try to do is, because a lot of times it is a spouse of a Catholic who is coming into the church and has never been baptized before, and we particularly want to make sure that that spouse is not having pressure put upon him or her by the Catholic spouse. We're particularly cognizant of that being a possibility. So, you do want it to be a free choice. I agree with you. And the infant baptism has such a is checkered past the right thing? Maybe that's not quite the right term, but basically began in earnest with Augustine, because Augustine believed that the sexual act itself was sinful, and so the baby was, born in sin. That's kind of where we get original sin from. That's not a real biblical concept. But that's,
and it's pretty strange also. I mean, in my mind.
Well, you need to read Augustine's Confessions. Augustine had a bit of a checkered career before he found Christianity. He was a Manichaean, for one, and fathered several children illegitimately and all of this. So, when he got, often people, like sometimes ex-smokers can be the most obnoxious people in trying to get other people to quit smoking. So, and so if the baby,
but now that's an example of advocacy.
If the there's advocacy and there's advocacy, I guess, but that more militant advocacy, maybe.
The manner of engaging in it.
Manner of engagement, yeah. But now the most of the Catholic Church, especially the Catholic fathers like Augustine, they're very logical people. So if your foundational belief is the baby is born in sin, then you must immediately baptize the baby, because if you don't, then, and the baby dies before being baptized, then the baby's going to hell. Well, church went along with that for a while and said, no, that's a little harsh. So let's come up with limbo. Well, limbo is neither heaven nor hell, but that's where the babies went who died before they were baptized. And so we went with that for a long while. And then pretty much after Vatican II, we pretty much said no, no more limbo, the babies, the baby is a gift from God and all of that, not in sin. And, we can wait, on the baptism. But
and that is demonstrating how religion, or the various religions, actually do grow, and most, I guess, maybe all, improve with time. In other words, they become more modern. But they are still, many of the religions are still pretty far behind in that growth or movement compared to what they could be and what some religions are.
And what I hear now from some is that, it's not so much all of that Augustinian original sin theology that's driving infant baptism. It's the parents that are driving infant baptism. And, while people consider the Catholic Church to be very authoritarian, what I've heard from some people is, well, this is just one fight we don't want to fight. And so we're just going along with, with infant baptism and then having First Communion, then having confirmation. Maybe a first step might be just combining confirmation and First Communion. That would, get it somewhat back in order, and then we would just have to deal with the, with the baptism. And the way this first came to me was before I even thought about being a Catholic. My mother-in-law and my wife, before we married, they were Episcopalian. And I can remember when we had our first child, my mother-in-law was just hot to trot to get that baby baptized. And I couldn't understand it. Why? And I was given the old story about, baby's not baptized, the baby's going to hell and all of this. And that just didn't hit me. Now, we were doing infant baptism in the Methodist Church, but I think the reason the Protestants took over infant baptism, they just took that over from the Catholic Church, which the Protestants basically came out of. I mean, the Christian Church before the Reformation was Catholic. Well, the part that wasn't Catholic was Eastern Orthodox, I guess, because of the Great Schism. But yeah, it's interesting how these things happen over time. But yes, there's growth. I have been dealing a little bit, talking to another about the Catholic Church and about my being in the Catholic Church and why I'm in the Catholic Church and all of this. And and I kind of see religion as church really as being around practices. So people, ask me, because I, as I think and some others who know me know, I basically do a little bit of Buddhist meditation from time to time. I'm pretty active, or have been, with the Rock Hill Baha'i community, and Catholic. And then I go to an Episcopalian study group on Sunday morning. So what are you? Mm-hmm. And I think I can pretty much say, that I'm Christian, in that my primary religious practice or practices is within the broad scope of Christianity. So, I don't see it, and that's one reason why when I was baptized, one question I asked: does this mean I have to be a member of the Church of Christ over in Charlotte? The Noda Church over at the Johnston Street YMCA is where I was baptized. And they said, no, it's just, we're just baptizing you by immersion. We're a Christian community, and we're baptizing you by immersion. But no, you don't have to sign any statements or do anything, make any kind of statement of confirmation of supporting that religion or anything. And maybe if all the Christian denominations could be that way, we might be a lot better off,
Yeah. So what you're describing is increasing flexibility and lack of authoritarian rigidity that characterizes more, quote, fundamentalist kinds of religious organizations. Mm-hmm. One of the interesting things that you're mentioning having to do with baptism and so on is the idea of sin and and being, quote, born in sin, and the whole idea of how sin arose and stuff like that. And I wonder whether that is going to be one of the more persistent components of all of the various Christian religions or religious denominations.
Yeah.
And of course, what the alternative to that is. And because I myself don't think that is a useful or helpful idea. In fact, I think it may actually be more harmful than helpful. The idea of sin, but there's it. But I think it is referring to something that is so. And so the way that I look at that is that we are hominids. We have a basic hominid nature that engages in some things that make for a good life, like love and cooperation and things like that, mutual grooming and so forth. And then things that that almost always increase suffering, and that would be like struggling for dominance. We're a dominance hierarchy species, and our tribalism with that fosters reduced empathy for those outside of one's tribe, making it much more possible to inflict damage on them and so on. And but also with regard to each individual as a small child, when the child gets legs, so to speak, when the child begins more and more to be able to do things, there's a lot of behavior of the child that's built into us that has to be modified in order to arrive ultimately at a mature, well-adjusted, productive adult. And so the child learns, no, you don't hit your brother. No, you don't throw your food. And good job, you cleaned up your room, and so forth. Because without this ethical help, instruction, or reward, and modeling for identification and so forth, without that, a person is not very civilized at all. So those things that are that have to be modified or inhibited are, I think, what within religions are referred to as sin. But because the like Abrahamic religions in their origins were very authoritarian, it was conceptualized as that the individual has free will and may disobey God, and therefore, and that's sin. So the alternative is, well, no, it's just lack of lack of progress in becoming civilized within a particular society, and behaving in the way that the culture of that society considers acceptable, and so on. So, and the problem about sin is it relies so much on guilt And there's a question as to whether we can rear children without relying so much on the imposition or stimulation of guilt, as opposed to praise, and as opposed to a kind of teaching that is not based upon, in other words, non-authoritarian teaching, and modeling for identification. This is the way to handle a situation like that, and so forth. So
the actual Greek word that we translate for some reason sin, and I don't know if I've never looked at the etymology of the word sin, but I know that when you see sin in the English translations, when you go back to the Greek, it's the word hamartia, which basically is an archery term, meaning missing the mark. And but so it is. Is it better to hit the bullseye? Well, perhaps. I mean, certainly, if you look at a archery target, it has if you've got points on it, has a higher point value. They're not hitting the target at all, or hitting out on the edge of the target. But then the question is, well, what is the mark? And, that's where we probably have some disagreement in the culture too, I guess. But yeah, I think we see when Augustine was using the original term, original sin, which in the Latin is peccatabile or peccatos, it is a state or condition. Some word sin, and then there are sins.
Wait a minute. Say that again. Say that again. We had poor connection.
Okay. When we're looking at the word sin, we're talking about some kind of statement of condition. When we're speaking of sins, we're talking of various and sundry kinds of individual, behaviors that don't quite measure up to whatever we think the standard should be of measuring up, I guess, But the word sin itself is just like you say, it is. We see that we inhabit a somewhat, seemingly from most people's perspective, kind of broken world. A world that doesn't seem to quite live the way or live out the way we think living ought to be. And so we come up with, we're in this condition of sin. And at least in the Christian scriptures dealing with baptism, it is interesting that to describe that outward and visible sign, they used a Greek term, baptizo, which basically means to take a bath. So it is a cleansing. And that's one thing that it is, a cleansing of one's original sin or whatever, I guess. Although they didn't. It really wasn't termed that, though, really, to Augustine, I guess, some of the original sin. But it is to cleanse you, that you're not quite right. I mean, you're not quite ready for the banquet yet, so you need to have the bath. And
so that's probably related to the whole issue of toileting, of the learning appropriate bowel and bladder habits, management, and so forth.
Because the baptism was not just in the Christian community. Of course, before there were even Christians, John the Baptist is out there baptizing. And so there was baptizing within the Jewish culture. There was also baptizing in the Greek culture. And the thing is that you are having a change in your outlook. What in the Greek it's called metanoia. You're having a metanoic experience. You are choosing a new way of life, a new way of living. And it's interesting, the symbolism there, at least in the Christian community, in the Christian act, is, and why I guess the early Christians believed full immersion was the way to go. Of course, they were somewhat following John the Baptist, I guess. But you're immersed into Christ's death, and so you die. And so the baptismal font that you're immersed in becomes a tomb. And then you are raised out of that water, and then the tomb becomes a womb, and you are born anew. So you're what some Christians, and sometimes it gets translated born again. I like born anew a lot better. And you're born anew of the water and the Spirit. So you come out of the womb into a new way of life. So it's a very powerful bit of symbolism. And like 29 and a half years ago, I was quite taken with it, because we didn't talk about it this way in the Methodist Church. I mean, I guess I figured I had been baptized. Nope, my parents never, I don't think I ever remember them mentioning my being baptized. But I was a member of the Methodist Church, so I was confirmed in the Methodist Church. Well, I couldn't have been confirmed, I don't believe, even in the Methodist Church, without my parents representing to the minister that baptized me, that was confirming me that I had indeed been baptized. So I always just had the but had no proof of it.
Yeah, well, going back for a minute before we're moving away from something I wanted to add in about this business of baptism and cleansing. In the Old Testament, there is, as you know, a lot of stuff having to do with cleanliness. And like if the woman has her discharge, then she is unclean till for length of time and so forth. And if she sits on something and you sit on it, then you're unclean until sunset, and you must bathe and so forth. I'm not sure that that's precisely it, but it's all sorts of stuff like that.
Jewish laws,
having to do with cleanliness, and we have probably learned that there is a reduced risk of bad things happening if the cleaner we are. Going to the idea of being cleansed, the first example of that comes about in the cleansing with regard to urination and defecation, and then also, of course, cleaning off dirt in general. My idea would be that that some of the idea of of baptism as a cleansing of, quote, sin is deriving from this basic idea that we all have to find ways of becoming clean on our own, and uh, and uh, and so the issue of baptism would be sort of an agreement in the value of being clean, or something like that. That would be one of the components of the ideology that underlies baptism, something like that.
Yeah, it is. It is a powerful, like I said earlier, it is a powerful symbol that the Christian community developed. That includes that cleansing, that moving away from one way of living to another, but that whole powerful symbol of dying and being resurrected that ties into other elements of the Christian religion is quite important, and that's another thing about most infant baptism. Most infant baptism is a sprinkling, so it's not a or in the Methodist Church I've even seen where the minister will put his hands into the water and then just lay his hands on the head of the infant, so you don't even have sprinkling. And it's it just misses that, and I missed it in the Methodist. I was even going to be a Methodist minister and had read much in theology and Bible and all that, but had never really thought about that symbolism until I took that 1 week course and in RCIA way back when. But it is and it connects so much of kind of the Christian experience, I guess. And maybe that's why it became the principal initiation, right for the church, for the very earliest Christian communities, And I agree it should probably be a one-time
Okay, I'm sorry, you broke up. Can you repeat what you just said?
Yeah, I'm saying baptism, I believe, should be a one-time only thing. It shouldn't be repeated, because, you don't come into a community, assume a new way of life, and begin living a new way of life, and then go back and do it again. It's kind of a once and for all thing, I think. We can be reminded of it, and I think it's good. In the Catholic Church, we do that. Well, you go into any Catholic church, and there's always going to be a little, and sometimes now you go into newer Catholic churches, and they're actually built with the baptismal font at the front. I mean, at the very back of the church where people can come in, dip their hands in the water, do the sign of the cross. For those who don't have that, there's usually a little, a vial of water or a little bowl of water that one can come into the church. And maybe some of the folks don't. I've talked to some Catholics, and cradle Catholics, and they didn't even understand, that hadn't been explained to them very well. And I told them, when you come into the church and you dip your hand in the water and do the sign of the cross, that's a reminder of your baptism, a reminder of who you are and all of that. So it's good to be reminded of it, perhaps. But
and that's a good example of the usefulness of ritual. Ritual helps to remind, and the more one is reminded, the stronger that whatever one is being reminded of is in the nervous system. So the problem with the religions has to do with the rigidity of belief system that is required for membership in the group or the tribe, so to speak. In other words, it's a part of the tribalism. So our religions have to get beyond that And they are, I think, to a greater or lesser extent. Some, of course, are not doing, some are extremely authoritarian and do not tolerate any deviation from ideology. And then others are very inclusive, and there are Christian religious organizations that welcome atheists and other religious traditions and so on. So so our religions have a long way to go, just like we as a species have a long way to go. We are really having a rough time on this earth, and have always had that to deal with.
Yeah, I heard something yesterday on NPR driving up here from Rock Hill to Henderson about the Methodist Church having a big dispute now over the whole thing of homosexuals and ordaining homosexuals, marrying homosexuals, and all of that. That it's really about to have some consequences in breaking up the Methodist Church. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of concerned about it. Having been a Methodist, I'm kind of concerned about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, on the website Humanianity.com, on the home page, a little ways down, it gives that metaphoric interpretation of Humanianity. It's this mountain with worms crawling up the mountain, seemingly, but what they're doing is growing at the front end and atrophying at the back end. Mm-hmm. And that means, as they go up this mountain, they get closer and closer to each other, and then ultimately, ideally, they would merge. So, the top end is the progressive end, and the bottom end is the conservative end. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the worm splits in two. So the top end is disconnected from the bottom end and moves up, and the bottom end stays down toward the bottom, and probably over time contracts more and more and may disappear. But there is that growth process. Yeah, within religions, and it's a growth process that is occurring within our species, I think, also. So, well, do you think we have covered everything of interest so far? Well, no, we're never going to cover everything.
No, we never cover everything. Yeah, that's pretty much kind of what we were talking Tuesday night about, authoritarianism and authority. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, and the question is the God, at least I experience, is that a God of is that an authoritarian God, or is that a God of authority? And, certainly what seems to come out of, especially most of the gospel writings, is, a God who is not authoritarian.
Gosh. That doesn't sound right.
Well, I think you can go back and look at Old Testament readings and kind of see another view there.
Yeah, well, there is progress. I agree that with time, Old Testament into New Testament and then beyond, there's some change. But to a great extent, the whole idea of, disobey me and you go to hell kind of thing is pretty strongly built into Judeo-Christianity, isn't it?
Well, it got there over time. I don't think, and there's some conflict as you read the New Testament, but I think the New Testament is primarily one of non-authority. Really, it is a non-authoritarianism, maybe I should say.
Well, what about what is it in Revelations where Jesus comes back and destroys everything and sends people to heaven or hell?
Well, it's interpreted that way, but you can also look at it. Certainly, I think the place to begin reading Revelation is the final chapter. Not all the other stuff that comes before, but that final chapter of the vision of the new religion, and that all will be one in God. Now, some Christians take that to believe, well, that's only Christians that'll be one in God. Well, the thing is, if God has created, all these people, and all, whether they're Buddhist, Muslim, whatever, and he loves them. And if you pin down a Christian, they almost have to say, most of the time, yeah, God loves them. But God is also a just God. And this group that you and I go to sometimes on Wednesday nights, that seems to be their kind of stance, is that God is a just God. And so, therefore, if you have, quote unquote, done wrong, then
you have to be
God
punished.
still loves you. God still loves you.
But he will punish you and torture you for all eternity.
And, well, I think most of them now have kind of maybe come a little away from that, looking at hell as not being this place, but hell being a state of being. In other words, an absence from God. And if you read Revelation, it does say that every knee will bend and every heart will know. God just learned it a little too late.
Yeah, you broke up again. Say it again.
I'm saying that God, when in Revelation it says every knee will bend and every heart will turn to God. The only problem is some people have waited too late for that to happen, and so therefore they're doomed to be absent from God forever. But that's problematic too, because if God loves them, how could God want to be absent from them? Of course, then people say, well, no, it's not God that makes the absence, it's the person. And I see some truth in that I think, here's where I kind of come down. In a British Anglican bishop, John A.T. Robinson, kind of helped me to formulate kind of where I am in his book, In the End God, is that in lived existence, or existentially we might say, there is a choice that's put before us. That whole choice there, as I mentioned earlier today in Deuteronomy, I set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Well, as long as you're choosing death and curse, then you're absent. But
and that
forever always be absent.
That goes to this whole thing about free will versus determinism, and the continuum between judgmental and understanding. And
yes.
And so I think the more fundamentalist and earlier religious ideas were much more judgmental, but as we have become more understanding of ourselves and how we come to be, we can move away from this idea that the response to unwanted behavior is punishment and revenge, very closely related ideas. And that whole idea of punishment and revenge is built into our basic animal nature. Chimpanzees do the same things. And so, but we do it in highly sophisticated ways, including built into the ideologies of our religions.
But probably, and maybe this book has been written, I don't know, but if it hadn't been, it needs to be written, is a good study and interpretation of what this thing of God's justice means. Does it mean that sort of retributive justice like you're speaking of, where you've done something wrong, and so therefore you must be punished, and if you're not punished, then God is not a just God, and maybe we're looking at that whole thing of justice in a wrong way.
Yeah, I think that
we do that in our even in our penal systems.
Yeah, right. I think that there are two meanings to the word justice. Mm-hmm. One is the fair distribution of resources, and the other is the fair distribution of punishment and revenge. Mm-hmm. And so I think there are good things and bad things about the word justice, but almost everybody considers justice to only be a positive word, and it doesn't bother people that the idea of punishment is in it, because we just naturally believe in the value and necessity of punishment, which I think is one of our most unfortunate tendencies. But almost everybody would disagree with me. You have to punish children, otherwise they'll run wild. And are you going to let a serial killer have a good life in solitary confinement? I mean, in quarantine, or are you going to make sure that the individual, in addition, suffers, has a horrible life, like being driven crazy in solitary confinement, and so on?
Well, that gets to that does get to the point of that one of the principal tenets of the Christian churches: love your neighbor as yourself, and how can you love someone, be in relation with one, care for one, have compassion for one, and punish them?
I think that
it's so bad in capital punishment in this country now. I guess we didn't always do it this way, but now you make it like even on a firing squad, like they do in Kansas, I believe. There are 3 people shooting, but only one has live bullets, and none of the 3 know who has the live bullet when they do the execution, when they do the injection. It isn't one person doing the injection; it's again 3 usually, and but one of those 3 it actually activates, but none of the 3 know which one of them have activated, and that shows the uncomfortableness.
Yes. The guilt, because
with electrocution, 3 people pushing the switch, and
and the prominent use of the word love within the religions, especially like Christianity, I think that the word really is referring primarily to not fighting, to not having anger toward others, because there's a recognition that anger and hostile behavior and fighting, it just increases the pain, suffering, disability, and early death that we humans experience.
Yeah.
So trying to get rid of that tendency is an important tendency within the religions to work on that. But it is not referred to directly as stopping, as working to not have anger and not be hostile and not get revenge and so forth and not struggle for dominance, because we don't really want to give those things up, but we recognize they're kind of bad. So what we say is, oh, you have to love your neighbor, love your enemy, love other people, and love is important. But they're really talking about getting rid of those bad things. They also, of course, are talking about having concern for people outside of your tribe.
Yes.
And trying to take care of those people who are having difficulty or in some kind of suffering mode and are disadvantaged in some way. You know?
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Yeah,
well,
probably about going. I didn't bring the charger in here, so we might be going to be running down on power shortly. I 100% when we started, but I don't know how long it goes.
Yeah.
That's several hours, but
well, we've always got future.
We do. We'll continue Skyping, even if I'm spending all my time up here in Henderson. So.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, and remember, you can always enter stuff in the belief manual and ask people to, myself included, to come to the forum to discuss stuff in the Humanianity forum. You know.
Well, I guess if I wanted to, I guess you could do that from the times when I'm available. We could. We could set up a connection there, and I could.
Yeah, you broke up again.
I said on those Tuesday Humanianities when I'm available, I guess. We'll kind of see how that works with married life, but see what I'm have a Skype station there. Actually, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm not. You're on. Yeah, I'm not talking. Okay, you broken up again. You broke up again, and
okay.
What I was saying.
Are you on Mugs?
I think you're breaking up a lot. I think we're running out of time. But I wanted to say you can do this at any time. You can use the belief manual and go to the forum at any time. Because
I know.
You know, because that's written. I mean, that's like Facebook.
Oh yeah.
So I think we're having increasing difficulty. So we better end while the ending is good.
Okay. Running down.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, good.
Yes.
Do this again.
Okay. Well, you have a good remainder of the week and thereafter.
You do too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.